Thanks, Scott. I'll move you back to the audience now.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the National Constitution Center. We are so excited that you are joining us today. It is Flag Day. We've had a ton of Flag Day programming happening throughout the museum and online, but we, in fact, are celebrating two milestone birthdays for two American institutions, and one of those, of course, is the U.S. Army. So we are very excited to have you here today to celebrate the birthday, 200 and I believe 48 years of the U.S. Army, where we are going to welcome some Army veterans who are going to share their experiences serving in this branch. We are so excited that you're here, and we've got about 1 minute until kickoff. But do me a favor and test out that chat function and let us know where you're tuning in from, who you are tuning in with, and how you are celebrating Flag Day and Army Birthday. Awesome. It looks like we've got some friends from New York tuning in, New York, Pennsylvania, California, Oregon. Very exciting. Welcome, everyone. We're excited that you're here. We've got just a couple of minutes until we get started, but if you have any questions for our veterans, feel free to pop those into the chat, and I'm going to do my best to facilitate and get those questions to our Army veterans. So let us know if you have questions about the Army, about our service members, anything like that, and we're going to do our best to answer your questions. So happy to see that you're celebrating with us today, Antoinette. Celebrating while working at the Newcastle Courthouse Museum. Awesome. We're so excited to have you here. It's always fun to celebrate civic holidays together, right? That's the real dream. We're excited that you're here. Thank you for tuning in today. All right, well, folks, we've got just about 2 more minutes, and it looks like we're going to go ahead and get started soon. Thank you for tuning into this special program.
Do we? All right. Yeah, I'll take this.
All right, I have my colleague Brian is live at the National Constitution Center. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight his screen so you can see our Army veterans and my wonderful colleague Brian, and we are going to go ahead and get started. Remember, pop those questions into the chat, and here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here at the National Constitution Center on this Flag Day, which is also the 248th anniversary of the establishment of the United States Army. Happy birthday, U.S. Army. And I know, right? Still look great. We will be today joined by a couple of folks who are longtime friends of the National Constitution Center and veterans of the United States Army to talk to us about their experiences with the oldest member of the oldest branch of the armed forces. Not that you folks would be oldest members. I said no such thing, gentlemen. But I would like to ask, though, to introduce ourselves. Of course, I am not a veteran of the Army. My name is Brian. I'm an educator here at the National Constitution Center. But I am joined by Sherman Hopkins and Jim Hewlett. And Gentlemen, if you'd love to tell us about yourselves, of course, I gave our names, but if you wanted to repeat your names or how you served, what role you played, and then we can dive a little bit in. We'd love to hear you. Sherman, would you like to start?
Sure. My name is Sherman Hopkins. I was in the United States Army from 1971, February of 71 through February of 74. I was enlisted, a E4. I was an interpreter translator for the Hebrew language.
Wow. All right. So I would ask you to say something in Hebrew, but I wouldn't understand it anyway. What about you, Jim?
My name is Jim Hewlett. I was a captain in the Army, in the Transportation Corps. I joined up in the summer of 71 and stayed until 1982 and did not regret 1 minute of it.
So you both joined around the same time, about 71 for both of us. What compelled you to join for either of you, especially if you were certainly fulfilling different roles? Like what inspired you to join it since you both enlisted?
Well, my situation was this. The draft was still intact during that time. I think Jim can tell you that. I was in college with a student deferment, and I was, just to say, a little immature at that time, right? So I did not register for the second semester at the university, and I knew that I lost my deferment, so they were going to come and get me if I did not enlist. So that was my motivation for enlisting. And also, this was during the Vietnam War. So I was told by the recruiters or the enlisted personnel that if I went to language school, I would probably not go to Vietnam. So that was my motivation. I don't know that we need more than that.
No, that's good. I mean, how about you, Jim?
Pretty similar, but I always wanted to make a career out of the Army. In fact, I went to a military college, like a little West Point. And while I was there, they had the draft lottery, and my number was a whopping 28. And I checked with the draft board and was told that if I did not sign up to go as an officer, I would have been drafted out of college in January of 72. So that made it a very easy decision.
Now, for both of you, once you enlisted, what were your first days like? What was your experience joining? Because I will say we had, for those of our friends joining us online, we had a number of young people who I believe today was day one for them, beginning with the U.S. Army. It's a tradition we have every year at the center or here in Philadelphia, but sort of day one for you fellas. How did that go? Or month one?
Well, again, it was during the draft, and at 401 North Broad. The building's still there. I'm sure Jim is quite familiar with that. Any veterans from this area know. And that's where they did the physical, the testing. And so day one, you would go there. I'm from Lower Delaware, so I stayed in the YMCA on Cherry Street overnight. So we'd be there early in the morning. We stayed all day for all types of testing, physical exam. And the first day, they loaded us up on a bus and drove me, now it's after dark because this is in February, to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And at Fort Dix, I get off the bus and people are running, hollering, screaming or whatever. It's dark, and we were staying in these old wooden World War II barracks where there's 50 guys on a floor with one bathroom at the end of the barracks. And that was, pretty traumatic for a person who had not experienced anything like that. And I don't know, it wasn't the first day, but the next day, just to go there, this was during the 70s, early 70s, late 60s, where the hippies and big afros and all that. So they line us all up, carry us to the barber shop. And at this point, they're trying to be, I guess, nice or mislead us. They had some photos on the wall. Jim probably remembers that also. And they asked how you wanted your haircut. But the long story short, they cut everybody, just zip, 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 cut it all off. And guys you thought you recognized, you no longer recognize. So it was an experience that I will never forget.
Yeah, I had 3 first days, if you can picture that. My very first day was the first day that I entered the military college. Your parents come with you and they're walking around and you're meeting the cadre. And they're also very nice and polite and, welcoming you to the, to college and telling your parents what they're going to take care of you. Really nice people. And then the announcement comes that your parents have to leave. So you go to your room and you see your parents leave. And all of a sudden you hear this ungodly noise telling you to come out to the corridor and bring your mattress with you, because they wanted to check, make sure everybody had a mattress. So you come out and there is just lots of screaming, and you just have no idea what's going on, but it's all part of the process. They break you down to build you up. You learn to take orders, as stupid as they might sound, like a mattress count. So you learn to take orders. And once you learn to take orders, then you learn to give them. My first day was when I went to summer camp, which sounds really cute. You're going to summer camp, sort of like band camp, until you get there and the exact same thing happens. But now I'm a veteran of it. I already went through it at college, but now I have the Army DIs yelling it. And there are a lot of scared kids. And you could always tell the guys who went to a military college, because we're not scared now. We're used to this. We can take it. So who the military people were, because we just stood there and took it and had no phase on it. My first day is when I'm on active duty as an officer now, going down to Fort Eustis, Virginia. And now that you're an officer, you're treated much better. There's no screaming. We're all polite. Everyone's now calling me sir. And it was just a big shock about that. And my third visit, or my first day, one thing that made it nice is mom and dad aren't there now. However, my wife is. And they're not about to scream when your wife is there.
Wonderful. Now, since that's sort of your introduction, joining in, I guess I have a two-part question I did want to ask you fellas, which is sort of, how did you imagine, since you both planned and enlisted and sort of with the expectation that you were going to join the Army, that you intended, it was not a surprise to you, but what expectations did you have going in? And then how did that change once you joined? Like, what did you find was different from what you had anticipated or expected?
Well, my father was a World War II veteran, and I grew up in the household with him, and he loved to tell his stories of what it was like in the big war, right? So I had probably a little better idea than some people as to what to expect. But I think coming in that transition, it was the hollering and screaming, and as Jim said, would it break you down to build you up? Like, don't question anything. We don't want you to think. We're going to tell you everything you need to do, when to eat, what to eat, how much time you had, the same way with the exercise and all. And I, probably because I was big and looked like a deer in headlights, I was a platoon guy, which means even as a trainee in basic training, I was responsible for, I guess, probably about 50 people, right? So that put more pressure on me because not only was I responsible for myself, but I had to account for these other 4 platoons of guys. So I think it was the discipline. Like you said, now I understand they are not physical anymore. They don't use a lot of profanity. But at that time, most of the DIs were just back from the war, and they could care less about us. In fact, in the Army at that time, they had people that were drafted. They had people that went in the National Guard and the Reserve, and then they had enlisted people. And so for a guy that was in the war like that, anybody that enlisted, he thought they treated us a lot differently than they did those that had been drafted. So I just think the discipline, the psychological portion of it was probably something I did not anticipate.
All right. How about you, Jim? Anything that was your expectations versus perhaps the reality upon joining?
My expectation was, being an officer, you figured everyone's going to respect you. It's not true. It's just like in civilian life. to get respect from somebody, you have to earn the respect. The fact that you have gold bars or silver bars or a star on your shoulder, you have to prove that you're worthy of those bars for it to be respected. Yes, everybody called me sir, but you can tell the difference between a respect and yes, sir. You know, you can tell. And you have to, just like in life, like I said, you have to gain everyone's respect.
I wanted to ask, since after joining, and of course, because I know you joined with a specific purpose or expectation of what you would do. Are there any skills you feel like you picked up, or things that you really were able to? That's a knowing chuckle. But are there any things that you feel like you learned, any skills or knowledge you gained as a result of your service, both that has served you well later in life, or things that maybe you learned that you didn't expect to or anticipate to?
Well, yes and no. And I would say yes, just like Jim. If there's any regrets, because I also had the opportunity to go to officer candidate school and be an officer. Like you said, that was a whole different world, being an officer versus being an enlisted person. But as I elected that, then you go up to some rank or position of authority. And as I told you before, in basic training, I was a platoon guide. So I had a little bit of leadership skills. The main thing I would say that throughout my life was the leadership skills and the discipline and the ability to follow orders, you know, of any superior or boss that I've ever had throughout my life. That's one of the great things that I learned from it. The other side is, I told you I was Hebrew interpreter translator. And this was shortly after the war over in the Middle East, the 6-day war. And so my language school lasted a year, right? And then I had some advanced training after that for about 6 months. So my first year and a half was all in training. But, you know, and we also had these clearances, these top secret crypto clearances or whatever. So when you get out, and I should probably just ask or think about, how many people do you know that speak Hebrew? You know, it's a language that not many people in this country use. You know, a lot of Yiddish. So I didn't have a lot of use for my language once I got out of the military service. And even after I finished training, in fact, I was in Texas and they said I could stay there for the rest of my term or go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I elected to go to Fort Bragg, and that's where I got out of the services at Fort Bragg. But again, the leadership, other skills, discipline or whatever, respect for authority, and just knowing how to lead others was great. But my language, I've really not used that very much at all since then.
When I went in the Transportation Corps, and I learned to be a rail officer. Yes, the railroad or the Army did have a railroad at one time. So I learned a lot about railroading while I was there. And so when I got off of active duty into the reserves, I had to find a real job, as they called it. So what better place to learn use your railroad skills than the railroad? So I used those skills and worked for Conrail and Penn Central for 25 years. So definitely learned a skill there. And while I was in the reserves, I was a company commander of a truck company, and which later gave me great skills, because when I left the railroad, I became the regional transportation coordinator for an oil company in charge of all the trucks and train shipments. So yes, I learned a lot in the military. It did a lot for me. But the other thing that it also taught you is life skills, how to get by in life and how to be a leader. And one of the other things is public speaking. People are afraid of public speaking. But when you're a company commander or a platoon leader, when you're getting up there in front of 60, 180 people talking and giving orders, you sort of forget about being scared of talking in front of people. This is nothing to us, right?
You learn to lose the stage fright. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, you learn to lose the stage fright.
I guess that there's a couple of things I wanted to ask as far as, do you keep in contact with a lot of folks that you would have served with in the Army? And then beyond those you served with, do you have a lot of interactions with folks who served at different times or in different, with different perspectives that you served most closely with? Do you keep in touch with folks?
Well, there were 11 of us that they pulled out of basic training like myself and sent us to the language school in DC. So we literally lived together, some of us, for a whole year. And then after that, half of us went to Texas and the other half went to North Carolina at Fort Bragg. So yes, in fact, one of the guys in my class is an attorney in York, Pennsylvania. And I talked with him, we're LinkedIn friends. And I talked to him probably within the last month. And then another of the guys who happened to be Jewish actually has traveled over to Israel on more than one occasion. He's lived over there and he's up in New England and we talk. But those are the two that I mainly spend contact with that were in the language school. Now, my Army buddies from the 82nd Airborne, we talk at least monthly. Every holiday, we'll get a FaceTime or a Zoom call and I stay in touch with them. And let me just say this, because my son, who's also in law enforcement, after I got out, I spent 32 years in law enforcement, but the military service becomes a brotherhood, probably second to none. I don't even know that I can articulate it because my son was in basic training and he came home one day and asked Dad, like, why do you have to go through this? I mean, silly things like he was really sharp in his uniform and he wanted to know why they would make him get down in the rain and mop up some water or whatever. And it's like Jim articulated, it's all about following orders and not questioning why, right? And, you know, and now that he's gone through it, he understands. And I don't think that I can explain to anybody the brotherhood, the unity you have, regardless whether it's Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Air Force, or whatever, that it's a brotherhood that you're going to have for life.
Definitely a brotherhood. I just occasionally meet up with guys I was in the reserves with or on active duty, but the boys, men, whatever, that I went through the military school with, the company I was in, there were 12 of us that were freshmen that all had to have our mattresses taken out and counted. And we became very close. We became known as the Dirty Dozen at school. And we just had our 50th reunion in May. And of the 12 of us, there are 8 of us are still around and we still get together every year.
Great. That's wonderful. Well, what about folks from other generations of service? Do you have a lot of interactions with them? And if you do, what similarities or differences do you find with your experiences?
Again, I think, and I have because I work federal, I'm a retired FBI agent. So all the military people coming on, especially Marines from Quantico, the officers, that you compare and contrast how things are today versus how they were when I was in. So it is a lot of similarities. It's, again, probably something you can relate to is like a sorority or fraternity. Sure, times have changed and people have changed somewhat, but there's still the unity, the brotherhood is still the same. And we, the difference in wars now versus how it was in the jungles in Vietnam versus the desert over in Afghanistan or the Gulf War, but the basic premise of the training, the living conditions is still going to be very similar.
Gotcha.
Definitely a brotherhood. I'll run it like today at the Constitution Center. There was a couple of guys that came in, had Army hats on, and I had mine on, and just, immediately make contact, and it's like a brotherhood again. You greet each other. Oh, what kind of a unit you in, and things like that. It's just, it's just an amazing. Once you're in there, it's everybody you meet that's in the Army, even in the Air Force and Marines, will still be friends with them.
All right. Now, we have some friends joining us online as well. And I have my friends, you folks both know Madison as well. She's referring some of the questions from our online audience to me. This is one that I think, I can't wait for your answers, gentlemen. What films best portray the reality of Army life? So if we're thinking of like Hollywood productions of depicting service in the military and the Army, which ones get it the most right or the most accurate to you and your experiences?
Kelly's Heroes.
Wow. I think again, you got to go through the eras from, World War II. There used to be a show on called Combat. Jim probably
Yes.
remembers. You don't even know what I'm talking about, right?
I gotta say, I don't.
Yeah, David Jansen and Vic Morrow, but it was a World War II war. But which ones? Some of the John Wayne movies, maybe. But then if you're in Vietnam, you got the jungle war that they have over there. And to be honest, I haven't watched many from like the Gulf War or Afghanistan. I don't know that I've watched any of those
No, I haven't.
movies.
All right. But that was an interesting question. I wanted to put it out to you folks, though.
I think Sherman and I if we were in combat, unfortunately we weren't. We have a whole different perspective. I jokingly said Kelly's Heroes, and I don't know if you ever saw that movie. And it's about them having a good time.
It's been
And when you're not fighting, which, like I said, I was not over in Nam, you did make the best of your times.
Well, thinking of making the best of your time, so I want to be mindful of the time that we have here. And I know there's a question I want to ask, which was, if you could do anything differently about your experiences or change anything about your experiences, what would you do differently?
Well, I think mine, as Jim alluded to, the difference between an enlisted personnel and an officer, I would have gone through OCS. Now, whether that changed my life completely, because at that point, I noticed he stayed in for 10 years. I wasn't aware of that, but I probably would have made a career of it at that point, which means that the other pension retirement I have would not have existed. So, but I think if I had gone through OCS, I probably would have stayed in for at least 20 years.
The exact same. I had put the 10 years in. I was moving up in the ranks. I was a captain up for major when I decided to get out. And I realized afterwards that if I had stayed in, my next step would have been a staff job in the Civil Affairs Brigade, which the unit that I would have been in had done a lot of active duty time. They were activated for Grenada, Panama, Kosovo, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, and Afghanistan. So it would have been a lot of time active duty, but all I needed was 10 more years and I would have gotten my pension for life and opted not to.
Well, I mean, thank you for sharing those, gentlemen. I think there's one more question we wanted to share, though, is before we leave our friends, and just want to put out, do we have any questions from any of our friends in the audience here? If not, I have, oh yes, young lady in the front row, yeah. Oh, go ahead, go ahead. Did we experience any resistance or any hostility or your treatment returning home, since you were enlisting at the time of Vietnam? Was there any response to you doing that?
Well, I think Jim and I we were both in college doing a lot of the protests, right? When you say resistance, I told you I went to language school in Washington, D.C., and this won't mean anything to most of you, but the May Day demonstration in May of 1972, down in Washington, they lined us all up with weapons with no ammo. and put us out on the mall to keep the protesters back. And we just think about it, a few months prior to that, we were on the other side. Now we're on the side defending the country against the protesters. But personally, I don't know that I saw a lot of resistance when I came back. I know they weren't welcome home, right? But again, because I didn't go over, I probably felt, I don't want to speak for those that actually served in Vietnam, because some of them to this day really have a lot of resentment on how they were treated when they returned home. But because I was here the whole time, I didn't personally feel that, but I can understand how they were treated when they did return home.
One thing is, it wasn't just the veterans who returned home from Vietnam. Being in the reserve unit in the States, I had duty, 2 weekends a month. And whenever we would go out we wore our uniforms, of course, but whenever we went out and did our, mission, we were in with civilians. We were in the United States, and having a truck company, we would drive all over the place. And we met a lot of resistance. We would be driving down the road and cars would drive past you, making obscene gestures to us, yelling to us. And, you see that what we experienced. And now you see today, when people come up to me, like today, or when we have Veterans Day, they'll come up to me and say, "Thank you for your service." We never got that during the Vietnam era. We were called baby killers and what have you. So for them to say to me today, "Thank you for your service," it gives you a warm feeling, because someone's finally thanking us for all the years that we put in, 40, 50 years ago. We're finally getting recognition for it.
Well, I'm sure someone has today, but I want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining us and for your service. I want to thank our audience in person and online for joining us. If you fellas have any last thoughts for our friends, we'd love to hear from you. And we can take us home.
Yeah, I have was about the civilian perspective or something. And one thing I see on the news a lot, when there is an issue or an incident throughout the world, the press will say, "We're going to put boots on the ground." It's not boots on the ground. These are human beings. These are American soldiers who are putting their lives at risk. And they should be respected for that. And we should not be called boots on the ground.
And just let me say in closing, I guess, I don't know that there's any more satisfaction thing you can do than to serve this country, this great country that we live in.
Well, thank you I don't think I can follow up with anything beyond that, other than thank you folks for joining us. Thank you all. Wonderful rest of our June 14th, our Army birthday and Flag Day. And thank you as always for joining us for programs here at the National Constitution Center. Thanks, folks.
Our pleasure.
All right. Oh, yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are so happy that you were able to join us for these, not only Flag Day, but of course, Army birthday celebrations. So lucky to have some Army veterans with us today to share their experiences. We wish you, your students, your teachers, everyone in your community a very happy June 14th, and we hope to see you again soon at a future program. Bye.